What's going on, y'all? Marvel Snap just released their newest OTAs, and I know people are going to think, oh, wow, these aren't super exciting, but I think at least one of them could actually shake up the metagame, as shocking as this may seem. Let's get started by talking about what we've got, and then I've got 5 decks to show you for these new cards now that they've been updated on the OTAs. So first up, Orka went from a 6/9 with a +5 power ongoing if it's the only unit here to a 6/11 with the same text. The Collector kept its text intact, but it got a buff from 2/1 to 2/2. Same for Luke Cage, going from 2/1 to 2/2. Now, I think these are all pretty safe changes to make. Not many of these cards even see a ton of play. The one that sees the most play right now is probably Luke Cage, and actually Luke Cage is the buff that I think will have the most impact on the metagame. But first, let's start with the Collector. As you can see, I've put together a Dino Doomwave deck for a first deck featuring the Collector, and I think this list is just a pile of good cards, and we run just enough stuff in it to make the Collector elite. Now, you'll note that we also have this sort of alternate game plan of pass the turn into Quinjet, She-Hulk things, if that's how we want to handle it. There's a lot of different plans jammed into one in this deck. So we can do, pass the turn, Quinjet, Moon Girl, She-Hulk, explode on turn 6. Or we can do, I'm going to play a Devil Dinosaur into a Dr. Doom, or we can do a classic Wave Doom kind of game plan where we have, a She-Hulk and a Devil Dinosaur instead of just a She-Hulk and a Dr. Doom as our predictable finishers. There's a lot going on here. The Collector is so much more of a role player here, but his upside is a little bit higher. You play the Collector, you get a Quinjet out there, one Moon Girl, and suddenly he's like the biggest 2-cost card in the game right now. After the nerf to Lizard, this deck is hurting for 2-cost cards. I think Jeff is a good option, but if you don't have Jeff, the Collector might be exactly what you're looking for. Second build of the Collector deck is a deck that leverages Storm, which sort of synergizes with the Collector because, the Collector can add power after you have already played it, which makes it a good unit on Storm. This deck is chock full of good units on Storm. Nebula is a good unit on Storm. Morbius is a good unit on Storm. The Collector is a good unit on Storm. Dracula is a good unit on Storm. There's so much good Storm synergy in this list. Now, as far as the Collector itself, it's actually a little bit harder to get him above par here. For example, you might just want to run Jeff instead. Again, though, a lot of people don't have Jeff, and I do think the Collector is going to be superior to something like Lizard in this list, especially since you're relying on Storm. You're making it more likely that they fill up one of the other lanes. If your Lizard's in one of the other lanes, that's a little bit tough to deal with because now that thing's going to be a 2/1. Now, I do think this is a list that is pretty close to solved, I think, at this point. We know what discard decks look like, and this is what they look like. Feel free to move cards in and out. I do think there's some sincere upside for the Collector here because one of the things discard lacks is that it's a little bit predictable, and just adding a little bit of element into like, oh, wait, I don't know how big that Collector is going to be, I think is valuable if we can expect it to reasonably be decently sized. Next up is a take on the Toxic Sarah deck. Generally, I consider the Toxic Sarah deck a little bit worse than the normal Sarah deck, but now that Luke Cage is getting a buff, we'll see. The reason I generally consider it a little bit worse than the normal Sarah deck is because you're a little bit more vulnerable. You see we're running multiple 4/10s, right? Like, there's gonna get Shang-Chi some of the time. If we don't draw our cards in the right order, our 2s are a bit mopey because, draw just Luke Cage, it's kind of iffy. Draw just Hazmat, it's kind of iffy. You really want both of them. But when you draw both of them, this deck is phenomenal. Now, you'll notice that the Sarah plan here is pretty varied. We have the Zabu and the Sarah to make our 4s even cheaper. We have Enchantress and Shang-Chi to get people gone. I've opted for a Debris here. We're really leaning into the board clog strategy, and I think Debris could be Polaris, it could be Green Goblin, it could be a lot of things. I chose Debris because otherwise we're very dead to Galactus, and I want to have an answer to Galactus that is just actually an answer to Galactus, right? Like, there are a lot of ways to 50-50 with a Galactus, but Debris is an actual answer to that deck that you can get a lot of cube equity out of by just snapping when they snap, and you know what they're doing, and you just Debris them and they die, right? Like, there's a lot of cards that can do that with a 50-50, but Debris can do it 100% of the time. That plus her synergy with the Hazmat game plan, I think, is why I would like to have her in here. Next up is the deck I think might actually finally be the best Cerebro deck. I think it probably already was the best Cerebro deck, but now it has such a huge advantage because one of the biggest problems with Cerebro is location variance. And one of the biggest ways to get location variance are to hit any of those locations that take power away from your dudes. And you know what Luke Cage does now in this deck is make those locations not only not matter, but be free wins for you. Now, you are still going to have some issues with locations that add power and locations that are adding things like a 9-power dude to your board, or locations that double the power of your strongest card. Like, there's still going to be some issues location-wise here, but between Storm, you can handle those. Luke Cage helps you handle the ones that take power away and actually swing them towards you. I think this is the closest we've ever been to Cerebro being playable in enough games that it can really affect the meta. And I'm super excited for that because I've been wanting to play Cerebro ever since I got this variant of it. So Luke Cage in Cerebro is actually the thing I'm the most excited about from this entire OTA, and I cannot wait to try this one out because everyone loves Cerebro, and frankly, the power level has come so far down recently that this might actually just be real. Like, the amount of things that have been taken out of the metagame as true power outliers, like, when you think about what Cerebro actually does, it's pretty damn strong. And now that there's less variance, less just instant lost games, I think this deck is, of the decks I've shown today, this is the one that is by far the one I'm interested in the most competitively. Finally, it's Orka time. You know, I had to put one Orka deck on here. I do think this might actually just be Ongoing Destroyer, but better. And hey, that's fine. Like, Ongoing Destroyer, but better, I'm with it. Like, you still have the same mix-ups, right? You get your mix-up of do they play Spectrum or do they play just one really big guy? Although the Orca is a little bit more telegraphed. It's not like it's not telegraphed when you play, like, a Destroyer on a Cosmo lane or whatever. Like, this is still a deck that might be, you know, legit. And I think it's a full pool 3 deck. I know this sounds weird, but I actually will be interested in testing this out because I felt like Ongoing Destroyer was just really close, but never good enough. Like the kind of deck that would be a 45%er in a lot of matchups, and you just never want to play those decks. And I'm wondering how much better the Orca actually is than the Destroyer. I'm definitely excited to see what is the future for this archetype. And I do think, you know, as much of a joking tone as I want to take with the Orca, this could be good. Like, it really could. It really could. So those are the 5 decks I'm interested in for the 3 OTA'd cards this week. And let me know in the comments which one's your favorite, what you think the biggest change will be. And as always, I'm KM Best. I'll see you in the next one.